Well, we have reached the halfway point of our City Focus Week, which we are hosting in collaboration with our friends and partners at Nova Financial. And Paul Mahoney, MD of Nova, has been joining me all this week to discuss the three main cities where Nova and their clients have a footprint. Yesterday, Birmingham, tomorrow, Liverpool, but today we're heading to Manchester. And Paul, so much to say about Manchester. A couple of headlines just to kick off. In February, it was named as one of the top 5 regeneration hotspots in the UK. And of note to landlords, it's had an increasing population over the last 10 years, so high tenant demand. But I think a good place to start would be, what's Nova's relationship with Manchester? How long have you been on the ground there?
Well, very similar to Birmingham since we first got going, really, around 7 years ago. I'd say personal preference-wise, of the 3 cities we're talking about, I would say Manchester is my favourite. I think it's the most similar city to London, so far as, lovely old architecture, entertainment, sport. And masses amount of infrastructure spending and positive growth and change taking place there at the moment. So we obviously love Birmingham as well, and we love Liverpool too. But if I was to choose to live in one, for example, I think it would be Manchester.
Well, that's interesting because you invest yourself alongside Nova clients, and I think I don't know if you're the same, but when I'm choosing an investment property, I do have that personal benchmark. Would I like to live there myself? Would I feel safe walking home at night from the local, train station? Do you kind of take that view, Paul, or are you just all about the numbers?
Look, I think it's important to understand that your target market would like it, because, for example, some of our clients that we deal with, that are baby boomers, for example, could never see themselves living in a 1-bedroom flat. But that doesn't mean that a 25 or 30-year-old doesn't want to live in a 1-bedroom flat. So I think from my perspective, it's about understanding, well, who is your target market? What do they want and what will they accept? And then making sure you're providing as much desirability to that type of person as possible.
Manchester is very, very popular with buy-to-let investors. And when I started the COVID recovery thread, documenting what's going on in Manchester as it kind of participates in the economic revival of the UK, I started that in December 2020, with the news that Manchester was the top city for buy-to-let. And I think it does it does kind of conform to that holy grail of what investors are looking for, because it has very high rental returns, but it's also enjoyed quite significant capital growth as well. So it's got both sides of the coin, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar to our discussion yesterday on Birmingham, some areas of Manchester have more than doubled over the past 5, 6, 7 years. For example, Deansgate. I mentioned the jewellery quarter in Birmingham yesterday. Deansgate is the equivalent in Manchester, the really nice area of the city. We had clients buy, for example, 2-bedroom apartments there for, 220 to 240,000 pounds about 6 years ago. That's in a landmark building there in Manchester. Those properties are now selling for over 500,000 6 years later. Wow. So, that's an area that has changed substantially. Going back 6 or 7 years ago, there was only one really nice building there. It was the Beetham Tower. And now there's quite a few of them. And you have, all sorts, footballers, wealthy people buying in those buildings, really driving up the prices. So, we've really seen quite a pronounced ripple effect in Manchester as well, in that, we started right in the prime central of Deansgate. We then kind of moved to Castlefields, just shy of there, and we've seen similar growth there as well, sort of 10% plus per annum. We then moved slightly out from there into Ordsall, which is just across the canal from Castlefields. Again, some great growth has taken place there. And now we're focusing on some of the other sort of outskirts Manchester areas, which are still 5, 10, 15-minute walk to the centre. but offer a lot better value than right in the centre. You know, we're going back 6-7 years ago, you were looking at sort of prices per square foot for good new properties of around £250. Now some of them are selling for way over £500. So great for those that bought back then, and still great for the value pockets in and around the city.
Indeed. Well, let's just return to Deansgate for a minute, because Investec have taken over the iconic House of Fraser building on Deansgate, and they are redeveloping that into an office scheme. And we mentioned this yesterday, Paul, in connection with Birmingham, that these big institutional and corporate investors, they spend tens of thousands of pounds on their due diligence. So when you see them investing in certain cities or even certain areas, you can kind of piggyback off their due diligence, because you know that they've done intense research on the area. And obviously when a really iconic building like the House of Fraser store in Deansgate gets repurposed and given a new lease of life, then that just helps the entire surrounding area, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's loads of that taking place. You know, there's upteen examples of that happening in Manchester at the moment. You know, most, if not all, of the FTSE 100 companies have a major office in Manchester. I think it's 96 of the 100 have a substantial foothold in that city. And that's progressing more and more with a lot of, similar to Birmingham, as we said, a lot of major companies moving, especially back office staff, to these cities, because they're still very commutable to London. And most of these people don't need to be in London, where, you know, you're looking at some of the most expensive real estate in the world in London. Well, it's much cheaper to have an office in Manchester. It's also much cheaper to have a home in Manchester, and it's cheaper to live. So, you know, both for the companies and for the employees, it's kind of a better place to be located.
Yes, on that note, actually, I've got an interesting statistic here that 31% of the population of Manchester are in private rental accommodation. And I think that shows a very significant tenant demand, which is, as we're always saying, if you're a landlord, you need to find the demand first before you go around creating the supply. And then on top of that, you've got the possibility of undertaking short-term lets, because Manchester is a very popular tourist destination. And then on top of that, should you wish to, you've got the opportunity for HMOs, student HMOs. So again, as we've said constantly, you know, cities, they give so many options to landlords. And as you said, you don't necessarily need to be in the city centre. You can be on the outskirts that have really strong commuter links into the city centre.
Yeah. You know, the city centre in Manchester has changed so much. 20 years ago, there was only 1,000 people living in the city centre. It was all retail and commercial space. And now there's over 30,000. So, you know, think about how that's changed. Quite a small space. You're probably looking at 2 or 3 square miles. You've gone from 1,000 people to over 30,000 people. So that shows the trend of people actually wanting to live in city centres rather than out in town and travelling in. The other big thing in Manchester is Salford Quays, or Media City, which is pretty much a whole nother city right next to the city. And you've only got about half a mile between the Manchester city centre and Salford Quays. Now, an area that we've been investing heavily, and our clients have too, is between those two locations. Places like Ordsall and Salford, which historically have been a bit rough, but they are all being massively redeveloped. And I would, you know, I am putting my money where my mouth is to say that area is going to be really nice in 10 years from now, because you've got thousands of young professionals moving into nice new build accommodation. That's going to make things like shops, restaurants, bars, cafes far more viable in that area where they don't really currently exist. So you'll see a big gentrification or regeneration taking place in that area over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, actually, talking of Media City, which is a kind of really intense conglomeration of activity, which is always good for landlords. The BBC have announced that they're expanding their presence there, and they're moving a lot of their different departments there. And again, good news for landlords looking for young professionals. But I think the other thing that's interesting about cities in general, Paul, is I've read only today that cities are now ranking as the top destination for people looking to retire. And I can kind of understand this, because everything is on your doorstep, you know, cafes, restaurants, bars, doctors, surgeries, transport, you know, parks, amenities. For elderly people that perhaps don't really want to drive much more, or want just a very easy life with all the amenities within very easy reach, I think we're going, you know, I think it's understandable that we're going to see more elderly people taking advantage of all the benefits that cities offer as well. And they could be, you know, quite long-term stable tenants.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's not just young professionals that you're after. It's anybody who wants those facilities and amenities, which do offer desirability to a very broad range of target market. You know, other companies in Media City are ITV, Eon, you know, big employers offering thousands of jobs. So there's lots of development taking place there. Media City itself has also got a little bit expensive, I would say. You know, prices have increased substantially there over the past 5 or 6 years, but there's definitely value close by.
Well, this really chimes back to what we were saying yesterday, and it's true for all cities, is that it's where clusters of activity happen, where young people go to make their name, their career, and so on. And we've already identified that there's kind of this media hub at Media City. That's one sector. Another sector that's very big in Manchester is logistics. And we've heard recently that Schmidt's Cargo Ball have opened a new factory, or going to open a new factory that's going to be making specialist trailers for the UK and Irish market. And also there's the Harworth Logistics North Park, which is going to generate about 5,500 new jobs. So I love talking about these clusters, because when you see a cluster of specialist activity, there's all the supporting activities that have to cluster around that to support that activity. And it's a very collaborative community that starts to build up, and this is very, very healthy for the cities to have these clusters of specialist activity and to become known for excelling and excellence in these activities.
Exactly right. You know, like you could literally put a map of Manchester on the wall, throw a dart, and I could tell you multiple billions of pounds worth of infrastructure being spent on any area around that city centre. A massive one is a £1 billion business park being built next to the airport. So that's a big one, which, you know, previously the airport's just been about commutability to the city, but now there's actually business on site. So that's a big one. You know, there's a whole new northern quarter redevelopment. So the northern quarter itself in the city centre was previously light industrial. It's now kind of the trendy area of the Manchester city centre. Lots of really cool bars, restaurants, cafes, that sort of thing. But if you go, there's a whole sort of column north of that, which there's still not all that much there when you go a bit further north to the city. And there's around 10,000 homes planned over the next 10 years for that northern section of the city. So pretty well everywhere going out from the city centre is being redeveloped by someone, quite often in partnership with the Manchester City Council themselves. So, you know, don't want to promote any particular developers or anything, but there is so much taking place around that centre area, which is just going to grow the city as a whole. You know, similar to London, I suppose. You know, you've got, you know, London isn't just about the square mile. You know, you've got miles and miles of business all around there. So that's what's taking place in Manchester at the moment.
Well, Paul, you're talking to Nova clients every day with the Nova advisory service. If they were interested in investing in Manchester in the summer of 2021, as we're talking now, where would you direct them and why?
Are we talking locations or?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, It depends on, obviously, we spoke yesterday about sort of looking at properties from a micro perspective. That's very important. And sometimes that comes down to availability. What so happens to be available in the market at any point in time often determines what makes the best possible investment. So I wouldn't say there's any particular location to solely focus on, but as I say, places like Ordsall, Salford, but close to the city. Salford's quite a big area. You don't want to go too far out. That Salford area close to the city. To the northeast of the city centre is quite good as well. There's quite well priced property there, still very, very walking distance, commutable, very walking distance to the city centre. I'd say pretty well anywhere within half a mile of the Manchester city centre, at the right price, with the right sort of target market and infrastructure around. For example, we've had a lot of clients invest in Old Trafford recently. Now, Old Trafford is a little bit further out, a little bit further south. However, there's now a tram stop there. So you've got 2 tram stops to the city centre. So previously it was kind of just beyond walking distance, but now that doesn't matter because you've got a tram constantly running through it. So these are the types of things we look for because, an area that perhaps has been a bit underloved in the past, all of a sudden it gets a tram stop and that completely changes. And that obviously can work really well in the favour of a property investor.
Well, I'm so glad that you mentioned the tram in Manchester, because again, it chimes back to what we were saying in the previous episodes about ICI, which is investment, communication and infrastructure. And if you do get a new transport link, it can make a very dramatic difference to property values. Speaking for myself, in London, I bought a 1-bed flat in East 14 because I knew that there was a new DLR station being put in about 200 metres away at Langdon Park. It wasn't there when I bought my flat, but it was built about 18 months later. And again, that had a huge impact on the tenants of the flats being able to move around the city. So absolutely important to look at where new transport links are going in. As you say, it just can really revolutionize an area and really make it connected to the rest of the city, which is good for tenants. So as we reach the end of this episode, Paul, is there anything else that you'd like to say about Manchester as a buy-to-let destination? We know it has good yield. We know it's had good capital growth. I think it's had about 17% capital growth over the last 5 years, according to Jones Lang LaSalle. So it's done well on both fronts, capital growth and rental returns. I think
that capital growth figure is a good example of why you don't want to just look at a city as a whole. We spoke yesterday about not looking at the UK property market as a whole. You also don't want to look at one city as a whole, because individual areas are going to perform at different rates. Now, 17% over 5 years, that's in my opinion not brilliant. The UK average is about 5%. But some areas have substantially outperformed that. Manchester, Birmingham, Liverpool have been at the top of the growth charts for the past 4 or 5 years. So with the right property in the right area, with the right driving factors, that's what gives us confidence in outperforming the market. And there are a lot of examples of that in Manchester. This is why we like city centres, because we can just have an absolute abundance of reasons to invest. And that's what we want. We want to tick as many of the boxes as we can to give people reasons to want and need to live there. And Manchester, just in pretty well all cases, offers that.
Well, that's what this City Focus Week is all about, looking at the cities, seeing why and where to invest. And tomorrow we will be heading to actually one of my favourite cities outside of London, and that is Liverpool. But we hope you've enjoyed this quick whistle-stop tour of what's going on in Manchester for the buy-to-let scene. And please join Paul and myself as our City Focus Week with Nova Financial continues. See you tomorrow.